A very good evening to all of you. I welcome you all to the ICANN initiative, the Hindu and Indian Express analysis. As yesterday we did not have the video, so today we'll be discussing today's Hindu and Indian Express and also yesterday's Hindu and Indian Express. So we will be discussing 4 newspapers today. So let's begin with the discussion of the topics. The first topic that we'll be discussing is about the functioning of the Reserve Bank of India. So Reserve Bank of India is the premier apex bank which regulates the banking system in India. So therefore it is a part of your GS3 syllabus, which talks about the banking system and the various issues related to the banking system. So even previously in the ICANN, we have already discussed a lot about the RBI and its functioning and ensuring accountability and the recent framework of the Monetary Policy Committee. Now, the Monetary Policy Committee has come into existence in 2016, which comprise of members both from within the RBI and outside the RBI. Earlier, fixing the policy rates was primarily in the hands of the RBI governor, who would have the final say in fixing the policy rates. But then, in order to ensure that there is more accountability on part of the RBI, the Monetary Policy Committee framework was brought into picture by amending the RBI Act in 2016. So after this, the Monetary Policy Committee as a whole has been held responsible for ensuring that the inflation levels in the country are maintained at 4% plus or minus 2%. So that is, the inflation has to be maintained between 2% and 6%. So the reason why this plus or minus 2%, which is called as the tolerance limit, has been provided is to take into account some of the exigencies which are prevailing in the economy and some of those factors which are not within the RBI to control it. So that is why this tolerance limit has also been provided. So the MPC is now responsible for ensuring that inflation in the country is maintained within this limit from 2% to 6%. And the good thing about the RBI Act amendment of 2016 and bringing about the Monetary Policy Committee framework is that this is ensure that there is more accountability on part of the RBI when it comes to fixing the or maintaining the inflation in the country. Let's see how it is done. Now, RBI is supposed to maintain the inflation levels in the country within 4% plus or minus 2%. If there is a failure in maintaining the inflation within that tolerance limit, and if that failure happens for 3 consecutive quarters, then that amounts to a failure on part of the MPC to ensure that the inflation is under control. In such a failure, RBI or the Monetary Policy Committee will have to send a report to the center. This report will be explaining the reasons why the MPC has not been able to control the inflation in the country within the limits that have been specified. And the report will also contain some of the remedial actions which the MPC is going to take in order to ensure that inflation again comes back within this limit of 4 plus or minus 2%. So this is the whole framework that ensures that there is more accountability on part of the RBI. RBI, if it fails to meet the inflation targets, it will have to come out in the open and explain to the center as to why there has been such a failure, and also come out with remedies for how the corrective measures are going to be taken to put inflation back under control. So this whole mechanism ensures accountability on part of the Monetary Policy Committee. But however, what this article discusses is one failure in ensuring this accountability. So recently in the August policy review that happened, the Monetary Policy Committee came out and it gave reasons why it has not been able to keep the inflation within the limits. So now we know that the inflation has also breached the 6% limits, and it is more than 6.6% that we had seen a couple of days before in the ICANN videos. So now clearly RBI has failed to keep the inflation in the country within that limit of 4 plus or minus 2%. So as we just discussed, that RBI has to give reasons why this failure has happened. So in the August policy review, RBI or the Monetary Policy Committee has said that it is because of the data limitations MPC has not been able to keep the inflation under control. So what happened is the National Statistics Office is supposed to collect data based on which the Consumer Price Index, the CPI data, is going to be published. But because of the COVID-19 induced disruptions and the lockdown, this data collection could not be possible. And because of this, the CPI data for April and May months could not be published. So this is the reason that the MPC has given in its August policy review, that it is because of the limitations in data collection, and as that was not possible, that we were unable to keep the inflation under control. So what this article, this editorial is trying to tell is, now this the COVID-19 related issues, and because of which how the data collection was not possible, etc., was a very temporary reason, because soon after the unlock phases started and all the non-essential activities had resumed. So because of all this, the data collection could have been possible, and at least a provisional consumer price index data could be published. So RBI should not get an excuse from its for its failure to maintain the inflation within the targets. Based on some of these kind of non-serious reasons, it should not get an exemption from the government. So that will account to dilution of the accountability on the part of RBI or the MPC. So this is what the article is trying to argue, that the reason now the MPC has given that why it was not possible for MPC to keep the inflation within the limits is because of the non-availability of data. That is a very simple reason, and the MPC should not get an exemption from the government based on such a simple reason for its failure to keep the inflation under within the limits. So this is about the issue of accountability of RBI. Now let's move on to the next topic. The next topic we'll be discussing is about the issues related to hunger. So issues related to poverty and hunger come in overlap. They have overlaps in both the GS paper 1 and your paper 2 syllabus. So what this whole article was talking about is that India already has a very poor ranking in the global hunger index. So there is a large amount of, a large quantity of number of children in India who are malnourished. So that is why we need to take this issue very seriously, and we need to think about some innovative solutions. So that is the whole gist of this chapter, so this editorial. It begins with quoting the Global Hunger Index, about which we have already discussed previously in the ICANN videos. So Global Hunger Index 2020 puts India's ranking at 94 out of 107 countries, and India is performing much more poorly compared to Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, all its South Asian neighbors. India is performing poor compared to all of them as well. So this shows very poorly on part of India when it comes to nourishment in the population. So the Global Hunger Index is going to measure a number of things, among which includes the undernutrition, wasting among children, stunting among children, and also the mortality rate among children who are below the age of 5. So these are some of the parameters based on which these are measured, and based on which the Global Hunger Index rankings are given. So on all of these front, India is performing poorly. That is why this editorial calls for adopting some innovative strategies. When it talks about innovative strategies, what it stresses about much is about a decentralized model and also using the local supply chains. This is of this editorial. What it says is now after the pandemic has started, the schools have been shut down, and the governments have ordered that since there were many children who were a part of the midday meal scheme who used to have their meals in the schools, but because of the pandemic the schools are closed down and children are now confined to their homes. So that is why they must be given some dry rations, is what the state governments have given guidelines in various states. But however, it is still data still shows that the amount of such dry rations given to the children is very less, is small in quantity, and also the offtake that happens from the FCI godowns for meeting the requirements of the midday meal schemes and the ICDS schemes has also come down. So it's very important for us to ensure that the food which is locally available is through the local supply chains provided to the schools, so that the schools can provide the local delicacies to the children. So what this article says is that there are definitely many small holder farmers in a particular region, and there are also several schools in that region. So what this editorial is suggesting is this group of smallholder farmers, they can supply cereals and fruits, vegetables, everything to these nearby schools. So this is actually a win-win situation. The reason being, when the local fresh fruits, vegetables, cereals are provided to these schools, the schools also will never run on a shortage of cereals and vegetables, and even the kids will get their food, freshly prepared hygienic food on time in these schools. So this is a first thing. Second is, if the governments come out with guidelines that the children will have to get a very diversified diet, because the children in India suffer from micronutrient deficiency, so we want to increase the intake of protein and micronutrients among the children and not just focus on rice and wheat. In that case, this scheme is also going to further push the farmers. The farmers will now be more encouraged to diversify their produce, to not just include rice and wheat, but also include various other cereals, millets like ragi, jowar and bajra, and various other foodstuff, even eggs for that matter, so that they can fulfill the requirements of the children who come to these schools. So that way, even the schools and the children on the one hand are going to be benefited by this local supply chain, and even the farmers can be incentivized to diversify their production if the state government issues guidelines that the children will also have to be given proteins and micronutrients. So that way, even farming is going to be incentivized, and the children and the schools are also going to benefit from this decentralized model and local supply chains. So rather than just relying on FCI to produce to distribute all the food grains to various schools for cooking the midday meal scheme food, it's better to rely on the local supply chains using a decentralized model. So that is going to be a win-win situation. So this is what the innovative strategy that this article is talking about. So you can suggest this in the way forward whenever you're analyzing, let's say, the midday meal scheme or anything that is related to the malnutrition and the hunger issues in India. This can be suggested as an innovative way forward on how we can use a local supply chains and we can have a win-win situation. Now let's move on to the next topic. This topic is also again related to issues related to hunger or related to malnutrition, which is again a part of your GS 1 and 2 syllabus. So this is another thing that you can quote in your way forward, or the measures that have already been taken by the government. In such things you can quote this measure. So basically, government has now decided that fortified rice is going to be distributed to children in the schools. So India has a problem of hidden hunger, where the children are not lacking in terms of carbohydrates, but they are definitely lacking in terms of proteins and micronutrients. So that is why, seeing that there is a lot of large prevalence of anemia among the school going children and micronutrient deficiency, the government has now decided that fortified rice is going to be distributed in the schools through the ICDS and also the midday meal schemes, MDMS and ICDS. In these two schemes, the government has now planned to distribute fortified rice to the children. So fortified rice is going to be rich in iron, folic acid and vitamin B12. So it is going to fulfill some of the requirements of iron in the body, which is the absence of which causes anemia, and also micronutrients. So this is a very important measure that you can quote in whenever you are asked to list the measures that have been taken by the government, or even in your conclusion you can write that government is already now taking up these measures of distributing fortified rice, which is very good because it is going to combat hidden hunger and micronutrient deficiency. So this is a very welcome step. So this is how you can also end your answer. So this can be used in such questions. Now we move on to the next topic. Next topic we'll be discussing is about the issues in the welfare schemes or issues in the direct benefit transfer. So even previously, government has come out with several welfare schemes like the public distribution system, the midday meals, ICDS, and so many other schemes. But they have all been, one of the important flaws among all these welfare schemes is that they are all, corruption is definitely there in each one of these schemes. So because government wanted to ensure that the benefits reach the intended beneficiaries, the targeted beneficiaries, and are not diverted and they are not leaked into the market. So government thought that technology can be a very good way by which the corruption and leakages could be curbed. So therefore, government started introducing the direct benefit transfer. It started mandating Aadhaar, which is a unique identification number, which should be authenticated at the fair price shop for the people to get their grains in the public distribution system. So all of these things started to happen, thinking that technology is going to reduce and completely eliminate the occurrence of corruption in the implementation of various government schemes. But as we saw day before yesterday about the scholarship scam that has happened in Jharkhand, whereby the money that were meant to be given as scholarships for several minority students have been diverted, and the state government on the one hand, the bank officials on the other, and also the school management, all the three parties related to this have connived to they have actually taken the IDs of the students, several minority students, and these students have been just given some small meager amount of cash, where the rest of the money has been now corruptly has been taken over to these three parties, and the minorities who are actually the intended beneficiaries of the scholarship scheme, they have not received any of the scholarship benefits. So this involved taking the identities of these students, and also even the Aadhaar was made mandatory for applying for the scholarships. So all of these barriers have been now completely removed, and these three parties, or these three stakeholders, the state government, banks, and the schools, they have connived to ensure that all the benefits meant for the minority students are now leaked and have been taken up by these three parties. So this shows that technology is not an end in itself, and if technology is employed to ensure that the instances of corruption is getting reduced, that may not always happen. In spite of the direct benefit transfer, in spite of the unique identification, scams like these scholarship scams do happen, and that is why it is more important for us to go beyond technology and look at the other broader issues, and also how the targeted beneficiaries should actually end up getting the benefits. So this can be quoted as an example when you're talking about issues in the welfare schemes. You can say about the scholarship scam that happened in Jharkhand, which involves corruption from three different stakeholders, the way they have connived together to take out all the money that should have actually belonged to the minority students. So this is about this issue. Now we move on to the next topic. This topic will be about the communal issues, which is a part of your GS1 syllabus, which talks about communism, secularism, communalism, and all such things, and also your GS2, which is about the constitution and the polity, and that also talks about the communal issues. So basically, the recent issue has been that the state governments of Uttar Pradesh and Haryana have decided, and even Karnataka for that matter, have decided that they will form a law, they will come out with a law which is against the practice of love jihad. So these two articles, in fact there was one more article, three articles were all an analysis of the measures that have been announced by the governments to formulate laws against love jihad. So first of all, love jihad means that there's a Hindu woman and a Muslim man, and the Muslim man apparently lures the Hindu woman to fall in love with him, and then they get married, and this is used as a pretext by the Muslim man to convert the Hindu woman from Hindu to Muslim. So this is apparently an agenda of the Muslim population to convert as many Hindus as possible into the Muslim population, and they want to just increase the number of Muslims in India so that the Muslims start dominating in India. So this is a theory around love jihad. So the analysis states, first of all, that this is against the spirit of the constitution. So definitely it's against the spirit of the constitution. Our constitution grants every citizen of India the liberty to marry the person of his or her choice, and also the liberty and the freedom to practice one's own religion. And even the Supreme Courts have given judgments against forcible conversions. So therefore the constitution itself has given individuals that freedom and liberty to make a choice about the life partners, to marry the person of their choice, and to also follow and follow the practices of any religion of their choice. So such this proposed legislation against love jihad is against the principles of the constitution, because this is trying to discourage the marriage between two faiths, marriage between Hindus and Muslims. So therefore this is rooted more in prejudice. Second thing is, it's definitely against the democratic credentials of India also, where every citizen is seen equally in the eyes of the law. So this, by prejudicing the men of one particular community that they are going to lure and trap the women of the other community, is outrightly undemocratic in a democratic country like India. The third thing is it's also going to delegitimize the interfaith love. So, interfaith love, interfaith marriages are very important to weave that fabric of unity in India. So, communal harmony, what we talk about, and the spirit of brotherhood, the feeling of brotherhood and fraternity comes from these things like interfaith marriages and so on. They are going to strengthen the belief or the feeling of brotherhood among different communities. They are going to make the bond between different faith more stronger, and a feeling of equality emerges out of it. But these proposals by the state governments kind of delegitimizes interfaith love, and they discourage the interfaith marriages. So this is going to weave even bigger wedge between the communities of belonging to two different religions, and this in turn may in future give rise to various communal riots as well between the communities. So this is going to even have a repercussion on the law and order situation and the public order in the country because of the communal riots. And the last one is the theory of demographic domination. So, as we just discussed in the beginning, how the underlying motive behind this love jihad is because the Muslim men want to convert as many Hindu women into being a Muslim, so that the number of Muslims in India become more than the number of Hindus, and India becomes dominated by Muslim. So this is the theory of demographic domination, whereby apparently the Muslims are planning to convert Hindu women into Islam so that the Muslims dominate in India. So this theory is again extremely flawed, and the reason I have written these four things here is that it helps you serve as a reference point that whenever this issue is there, you have to talk about the constitution, you have to talk about democracy and ethical issues out of this, and you must also talk about the fact that it delegitimizes interfaith love, and it weaves a wedge between different communities. It harms the fraternity and the feeling of brotherhood in India, and it might also lead to communal riots and harming the public order. And finally, the word demographic domination is also an important keyword that you will have to use in your answers. So all of these things, this proposal by the state governments to introduce legislations against love jihad amounts to a communal issue, and in the future, because of this, there could be communal riots as well. And again, it is against the principle of the constitution. You can use the same example even in your ethics paper depending upon the question. Now let's move on to the next topic. Now, this topic is about the right to equality, in that specifically this whole article is about the right to equality in terms of marriages. That is, when two adults, a male and a female, they have the freedom to choose the life partner of their choice, and they have the right and the freedom to get married to that person. But the same right is not being given to the transgenders, or not the transgenders, the same right is not being given to the same sex couples. While homosexuality has been decriminalized in India, but we have not completely recognized the marriages of the same sex couples. That is still not recognized and is still not acknowledged in India, even though homosexuality as such has been decriminalized. So here the right to equality is talking about the equality between normal as in a male and a female consenting adults to marry, and also the same sex couples who want to marry. So there is no equality between the two, because the former has the right to marry based upon the choice, but the latter, that is the same sex couples, they face a lot of issues to be together and to marry. So in that sense, the right to equality has been violated. So this is a part of your GS2 syllabus. The author of this article is Vanita, and she is a novelist and a scholar. She has written a book titled Love's Right, Same-Sex Marriages in Modern India. So in this book, she has interviewed hundreds of people, and she has explored the various issues that these same-sex couples are facing. So she says that same-sex couples in the past also, there have been hundreds of such same-sex couples who have done either of two things. One is that they have married each other and they have stayed, or two, because of not being able to tolerate that discrimination and harassment in the society, they have committed suicide. So these are, she describes a lot of these interviews and how people have faced issues because of being the same sex couples. Let's have a look at these issues that she describes in the article. First is about the value system. Recently, our Solicitor General of India has also said that the same sex marriages should not be allowed, cannot be allowed in India because it is against our so called value system. So, in the name of the value, we are violating the rights of the individuals and we are violating the right of the same sex couples to be in that bond forever by getting married to each other. So, this value system is very vague, and we have forgotten the values that we actually stand for, or the core principles or the core values. Rather, we have now made our value system so ambiguous and so amorphous that anything that we don't want to welcome in the society is being said that it is not as per our values. So even the Solicitor General of India has himself commented that this is against our value system. So under the name of value system, the same sex couples are suffering a lot. The second is a family support. It's very difficult for the families. It has been very difficult for the families to accept that their children are actually same sex couples. So that's how the family support has also not been, these couples even do not get the family support also to go forward and marry the person from the same sex. So this is also very important because many of the times these people are just thrown away out of the families into the streets. They are not welcomed into the families, so they lose all that family support also, and this is another issue that is being faced by them. The third is the institutional support. Here the author of this editorial, Vanita, she shares the story of two nurses. These two nurses, they wanted to marry each other, and they told their families about it. The families were initially very hesitant about it, but somehow later on, after convincing them, they accepted, and these two nurses in Bihar, they got married to each other. So finally, after a lot of struggle, the families could accept, but they did not get the institutional support. That is, after they got married in Bihar, the registrar at the Registrar of Marriages did not register their marriage. So such institutional support is also lacking for the same-sex couples. Like even when the society supports, even when the family supports, the institutions are also not open to these kinds of things, and even they do not support the same-sex couples. The last is a philosophical angle. What Vanita in this article also shares is that she has interviewed a large number of priests and saints, and what they believe is whenever two people are getting married to each other, be it from different classes, different castes, or whether it is the same-sex couples or whatever, if they have that bond between them, it is because of something that is related to their previous birth, that even when the society disapproves of their union, but they still want to be together because they have that special bond between them, and this is because of their previous birth things. So even when this philosophical angle is seen, in fact even in Katha Sarit Sagar, it says that it is because of whatever has happened in our previous birth. That is how people, even in this birth, in spite of the social disapproval, there are intercaste marriages, there are interreligion marriages. It is because of the bond that they have in this world that comes somewhere from their previous birth. So this is a philosophical angle. In spite of the presence of that philosophical angle, the same-sex couples are disapproved in the society, and who are otherwise very religious and philosophical, they cannot see this philosophical angle, and even the couples, same-sex couples, are rejected and disapproved in the society. So these are the various issues that Vanita discusses in this article about the right to equality in marriages should be there even for the same-sex couples. So she ends the article by saying that India is one of few of those countries which have decriminalized homosexuality. So soon India should also embrace same-sex marriages also. And we must all be one of those few countries which recognizes same-sex marriages. Otherwise, it is going to lead to a very weird situation where the same-sex couple who are married to each other, whose status is married in England, upon arrival in India, what would their status be? They would no longer be considered married, because marriage of same-sex couples is not even considered a marriage in India. So in that case, will their status be single? So such weird kinds of things will also happen. So India will have to be move that step forward in the civilizational pathway, and it has to accept and recognize the same sex couples, which will be one among the very few countries which have done so. So this was about this whole article. This is a question that you have to take up today. So, what communal riots are, and why are there have been a lot of instances of communal riots happening in the recent years? And you'll also have to suggest measures to handle them. It's a 15-mark question for 250 words. This is a full-fledged topic. So, if you just prepare this question, you will be ready with this whole topic. And this can be a very common topic in your exam, and you can definitely expect a question on this topic. So, day before yesterday, we took up a question on terrorism. Again, you might begin with a definition of terrorism by the United Nations Security Council. And even because if it is a 15-marker question, even when the question is not asking why there has been instances of terrorism, the terrorist attacks have increased, even if there is not that is not specifically asked in the question, you will have to briefly write about it, because in a 15-marker question, you are supposed to follow up in a very analytical way. So you just have to briefly mention why, because of the economic reasons of the diversity and disparity, and politically because somebody is just suppressed and they don't find their voice, and also developmental, where there are developmental shortages and scarcities which are there. So then you go on by analyzing what measures can be taken to reduce it. So it could be developmental again, which is both political development, economic development, providing more jobs and good quality jobs, all of that. Then you also have to talk about the vulnerable sections who are more vulnerable towards radicalization. So that could be youth and minorities and migrants and so on. And then is the financing of terrorist activities, and that you can mention the role of the FATF, Financial Action Task Force, also because it deals with terror financing. So about talk about that. Then is the organized crimes. So definitely terrorism and organized crimes have organic linkages between the two. So the money that comes from arms smuggling, drug trafficking, etc. is poured into terrorist activities for acquisition of arms and for training and carrying out of the terrorist attacks. So you need to delink the two, and you have to have a crack a whip on the organized crimes as well. You will definitely have to ensure security, which is both coastal, maritime, and border security, through the cooperation of the police and the armed forces. So the security aspect you have to talk about. Then is institutional aspect, which is like the NIA, NatGrid, CMS, RAW, IB. Then international, also you're going to talk about the Global Counterterrorism Forces Forum, the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism. Then technology is another tool which is present to the terrorists of today, which they can use to create havoc, and catastrophic destruction can be done because of that. So presence of dark web and encryption, all of that is facilitating the terrorists in carrying such sophisticated remote attacks. Social media has become a platform where the youth get easily radicalized. There are online recruitments that go on social media of the terrorists and the jihadists. So this is again a place which needs to be regulated. Then you have to definitely talk about legislations like PMLA, UAPA, and any flaws in them and how they should be rectified in order to crack a whip on the terrorists. So you already have got 10 different points to write, and that is more than sufficient for a 15-marker question. For the other articles that weren't important, and some of these we have they are already a repetition. For example, the national education policy, we have discussed it multiple times, and similarly about the Charlie Hebdo and the killings that have happened in France, we have discussed it. So Quad, again we have discussed it multiple times, and whatever was in this article was to us. So similarly, these were the other articles that were not important or about which we have already discussed before. So that is it for today. Thank you.